secret.
All right. All right, if we can get everybody to come inside and we will get this next panel started.
She's with our tribe. Oh, nice. She's our public affairs. She's showing me Banner.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So my name's Robbie Bennett. I'm the president and CEO of the Savannah Riverside Community Reuse Organization. Today we're going to have a conversation around how do we generate economic development opportunities with new nuclear. The last panel you heard a lot about some of the programs and projects that are happening in great communities and have exciting stories to tell. We're going to continue that with our panelists today. I know for a fact there are many economic developers in the room. You may get called on if you don't have good questions. We also know there's a lot of industry here as well. So that being said, what we want to do is make sure this is an engaging conversation. We're going to start with some introductions, let everybody talk about who they are, why they're here, what's going on in their communities, and then we'll start with some questions. I have several, but we want to hear from you. What's on your mind? What are some of the concerns? What we want this panel to address is how do we figure out what are the benchmarks, what are the expectations, and how do we mitigate any challenges that could be facing us as we go through the economic development process with new nuclear. That being said, we have a great panel today. We have Randy Herman, City Manager of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. We heard from Chuck Smith a little while ago. As you know, their name tags say they are open for business. It's not necessarily fun following Chuck as a moderator because he has more enthusiasm than all of us in this room. Next, we'll have Wyatt Peterson, who's the director of the Shoshone Bangkok Tribal Department of Energy, to give us a tribal perspective on new nuclear. And then we'll follow up with Matt Solomon, who's project manager with the Northwest Colorado Energy Initiative. That being said, this is going to be a fun panel today, lots of good conversation. And with that said, I will turn it over to Randy for introduction.
I'm Randy Heeman, City Manager of Oak Ridge. I've been there about 18 months now. When I took this position, I was told you'll spend about 40% of your time on the DOE stuff. And I will guarantee you that I spend more than 40% of my time on the DOE stuff right now. And it's been really exciting in my career to jump in and be a part of what's going on in Oak Ridge. And I will tell you, as a city manager, they always tell you, stay in the background, never outshine your city council people. That is not a problem with me. I will never outshine Chuck Hope. You're right, Robbie, the most enthusiasm in the building. So it's great to have advocates like that on a city council. That is one of the great benefits of being in Oak Ridge, is having somebody like that advocates. But I will just tell you that we've been really busy with companies coming in, trying to amass a little more land, and it's an exciting time to be in new nuclear, and also to be a part of, to be honest, some of the older technologies. We are not all focused on new nuclear. We want a blend of existing technologies because, quite frankly, not all new nuclear companies are going to make it to the finish line, but the ones like we announced recently, the BWXTs that do what they do for the nuclear Navy, they're always going to be here. So we've tried to create a balance between those in Oak Ridge, and we've been very busy.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Wyatt Peterson. I'm with the Shoshone-Bannock Tribes Department of Energy. I started working with the tribe's natural resources in 2010 as a fish and wildlife technician. Ended up working in land use, and January of last year took this position with the tribe's Department of Energy. I want to start by expressing some gratitude for the Department of Energy. ECA for inviting us to be here today, the Idaho National Lab, the Naval Reactors Facility, Battelle Energy, and the various partners that we have throughout the energy landscape. So I think it's important to invite tribes to these kinds of things, and you're going to hear a lot about economics and that being a very big driver. And that's always going to be true. With tribes, it's a slightly different lens. We are trying to make decisions for generations that we will never meet potentially, and trying to have that forward-looking vision. It has a lot of pressure to it. It feels as though, we can't mess this up. We got one shot at this thing, and we need to own the decisions that we make. That at times can make it difficult to make decisions happen in time with what we see like at the state level, the federal level, those kinds of things. So as community partners in your states, in your areas, wherever you're working, I would encourage all of you to reach out to tribes, talk to them, get them involved early. Same idea as what we were hearing a lot about the various communities. Try not to leave any tribes that have interest in your area out of those conversations. So, sorry, my phone shut off here. Another thing that, is a really important thing for the federal side, especially in the political environment that we're in today, is for people to really evaluate what trust responsibility means. What does that actually look like, and how do we uphold that? And that's one of the big things that for tribes we're always going to continue to push for. So as we evaluate these big projects, we are pro-nuclear. We want to see these things come online. We're pro-clean energy. We just want to make sure that it happens in the right way and not be just consulted with. We want to be active partners. We want to help drive this mission forward. So thank you all for having us here today.
Thank you, Wyatt. Matt?
My name is Matt Solomon. I'm the project manager for the Northwest Colorado Energy Initiative. And our governor in Colorado made a statement 6 years ago. He said he wanted Colorado to be the leader in the transition away from coal. And he did just that. Colorado is the leader in the transition away from coal, and he did it with a date and not a plan. And what makes him the leader for having such poor foresight is he gave a long list of lessons learned for Wyoming and Idaho to do it the right way. Because here we are 6 years later, and we still have a date that's being doubled down on, and we don't have a plan. And so when I was asked to step in as the project manager for NCEI, we were going to conduct a feasibility study for the transition of the Craig Power Station from coal to nuclear, and the state decided it wanted to do a feasibility study of its own. And what came up in conversation was, well, this is probably preordained by the governor. The community wants to have a voice. So Commissioner Doug Overton's in the back of the room from Rio Blanco County is on my advisory committee. We've got Mayor Chris Nichols and Town Manager Peter Brixey is here. Please find them and talk to them. They're here to be engaged. And in our collective conversations, we wanted the community to have a voice in this feasibility study. So we conducted surveys locally and tried our best to communicate from the ground up so that as that top-down approach came together, it could meet in the middle. Interesting tidbit from the surveys, 84.5% of people in Northwest Colorado support nuclear energy. Another interesting tidbit that everyone in this room could learn from is millennials are 100% supportive of nuclear before and after facts are given. So being fact-based and data-driven has been very important for me in my conversations, and having the trust of the mayors, the town managers, and the county commissioners has allowed me to get creative in our outreach and really engage with the local community. And I look forward to being here. I thank ECA for having this. This is a great room of people, and I learn something every time I'm around you all. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Oh, wow. So we have a lot of opportunity and a lot of conversations floating around the room. One of the questions is, how do we engage with industry? How does industry engage with us? My question to you to start with is, for each of your communities, y'all are coming at this from a different perspective. You're coming from a DOE perspective, you have a site and have been able to pull a lot of land into the community and repurpose that for new nuclear. You have the tribal perspective, and then Matt, you're coming with trying to use former coal sites and really engage a new energy source to replace the coal. How is it working for each of y'all, and how do you want companies to continue to reach out to you? Who wants to go first?
I'll be happy to start. It is going well for us, and we have reached a point, quite frankly, where we have had to ask for additional land because a lot of the folks that are coming in want really large parcels. The Orano project, for instance, sits on about 700 acres. We're fortunate that we are 92 square miles within our city limits, and a lot of that land is still to be repurposed for nuclear. We want companies to come directly to our Oak Ridge Corridor Development Corporation because it's key for us to really try to fit the pieces of the puzzle together. We're having a lot of discussions about who does business with who and how can we co-locate businesses so that there's synergy there. How do we get product from one place to the other? We've got, an enrichment facility here. How are we going to have haul roads so that we don't have to go on public highways and go through all that? So we want to get involved very early on with all the companies, which we have. And we want to understand their technology so that we can serve them better, because we've got the whole variety, everything from, the laser companies like LIS that Councilman Hope mentioned, up to standard enrichment. So we want to understand the whole life cycle and try to put these people together. And also we want to talk to them early on so that we can bring them into the family. I was city manager in Mooresville, North Carolina for a while, and if you're not familiar with that, that's the home of NASCAR. And if you've ever seen fighters or drivers fight on the track, they carried that into the boardroom. It is so great to be in a place where the industry is so big and collegial that you can bring people into the family. And with the ETech group that we've got 80 people that meet, once a week, really to form those partnerships. And we feel like that's one of the secret sauces that we have there. So we want to bring them in early. We want to really understand who they are and see what kind of synergies that we can create around them so that we can, as Councilman Hope mentioned, try to work on the whole supply chain all the way through and do it in a logical manner. We're talking now about prototyping facilities and other things that we think will get us to the next level of service with some of the companies that have come in.
Thank you. I think for us, we are seeing a turn in this where we are getting more engagement. Again, we're here today, and I'm not saying we haven't been, but maybe we haven't been at these before. So this is a good example of that re-engagement with tribes. I think one of the things that we see a lot is that idea of our decision-making process being, I don't want to say it's more thorough or anything, I don't mean to imply that, but it's just a different way of looking at things, I think, has maybe caused some, maybe developers and things like that to not necessarily seek out tribes. We want to move past that. We want to get to where we can do these things with both sides of this being considered, and again, we're not just a checkbox on an application or something, but we're actually a partner on it. So we're very actively involved with a lot of the research efforts that are going on at the various labs. The overall idea, we talk a lot about long-term stewardship, so the management of waste, the development, the industries that are needed in order to produce the fuels. We talk about these things a lot. As far as the companies go, I don't, obviously not trying to speak for other tribes, but in Idaho, I think that's been nuclear has not necessarily been a big push as far as let's try to get a plant online. And so we haven't seen a bunch of involvement there. But we are directly involved with these companies that are going to test at Dome and anything to do with INL or other labs potentially. So we're seeing that engagement really start to happen, and what we're finding is that we're starting to build these relationships in the hopes that when it gets closer to being a project that's ready to go, we will be a valid partner in those things. So.
All right, Matt?
As far as industry coming and how they should do so, one, Simon Tafoya is in here from Pueblo, and he hit the nail on the head. Come to the table investment ready. Get your groundwork done early. What's that mean? That means engage with the community, have fact-based conversations, and be ready to answer the hard questions. You've got two really strong energy communities in Colorado, Pueblo and then the northwest corner, from Montrose County all the way up to Moffett County. And they have a long history in Pueblo of steel production and you name the industry and they can do it in Pueblo. And the northwest and western area of the state has a long history of mining and energy production. And if you understand that history and you can understand some of the people and the culture, just like the tribal nation culture, the culture of the people in the Old West, you'll know candid conversations, community engagement, and come to the table ready to go. It goes a really long way. Coming to the table with a promise and a hope of, hey, we would like to do this is good, but we've all seen plenty of that. We want actionable plans. We have an industry that is 45% of the GDP in Moffett County, and if you look at the ripple effect of that industry in the city of Craig, it's almost 60% of that town's GDP, and the first stack's closing this year. By 2030, Comanche down in Pueblo is going to be closed, and the Craig Power Station will no longer be utilizing coal, and hopefully the transition to natural gas will happen. But think about that ripple effect and the greater impact on these communities. So if an industry does want to come to the table, like Oak Ridge says, we're open for business. House Bill 1040 passed 2 months ago. Nuclear is defined as clean energy in the state of Colorado, and we have leadership here in this room that are here because they're open for business. Please be candid, please be honest, and please have an idea of the investment ready to go.
Great responses. Let's talk a little bit about the reality of reality of the nuclear industry and what it means. So for those economic developers in the room, we're obviously talking about an industry that's not traditional economic development. It's a lot longer lead times, a lot more challenges, hurdles, permitting that most go into this. Gentlemen, if you could, let's talk a little bit about what makes it necessary to approach nuclear projects differently, and how are you seeing these timelines and cost affect what's happening in your community and the completion or these projects coming online?
Sure. You want to do first?
You go ahead.
Okay. So our state's invested around $60 million in nuclear over the last 2 years and come up with a plan. But we all know it takes time to implement plans. It is difficult with a lead time that averages somewhere around 7 years. By the time you announce a project, you know, the community starts to say, where is it, where is it? So you've got to keep top of mind with your community. You've got to always talk about the lead time up to those projects. But they do start to employ people, you know, at an early stage. We've got Orano has already hired their first employees. So you've got to be mindful of that. You know, as we look at negotiations, I think it's been mentioned earlier, we have all had some fits and starts. I think the game changer for us was when we start to see, you know, Kairos partnership with Google, Triso partnership with Amazon. To me, when business gets on the books, that is a new era for nuclear. And our community start to say, this is real and this is going to happen. Because our property with one of those businesses did set for a little while before we saw some action there. So it's about setting expectations. It's also about working with companies in a way where we get, as a taxpayer, we get what we need out of the equation, and that is investment and stable jobs. So all of our projects, obviously have clawbacks on them. I will offer a word of caution is if you're writing a clawback and you put in a certain amount of investment, make sure that is vertical on-site investment. We all know how much research is going on in this world, and I won't say anything else about that. But, make sure that you've got a really good plan laid out so that, if something does go wrong, you can quickly revert that land into a new project. So, if at any point in the period one of these projects looks like it may or may not happen, because so many are dependent upon federal funding and research moving from a bench test up to full scale, so that we have to weigh those things and make sure that we're protected from a standpoint of being able to reuse that land, because it is in limited capacity for all of it. You got to be flexible in all these projects, I would say. We typically love to see an MOU so that we don't get too far ahead of a project. And I'll say that because when you're working with a site selector, and are there any site selectors in the audience? So I can say this, they're great, and I love working with them. They don't always understand the projects that they're representing. And sometimes they get out in front of the project and they promise things or they do things and the projects change. So you've got to remain flexible. We're going through that with one project right now where it looked a little bit like this, and then it's not a bad evolution, it's just not what was written in the agreement. So we'll change the agreement, that's no problem, we're flexible. But it's really good not to get too far out in front of a project until you really understand it and it's somewhat designed. That's why I like an MOU prior to getting into an agreement. But what I think companies are really looking for is, do they accept nuclear where we are as well? Predictability on our side is important. Predictability on the company side is important. They need to know if they come to a public hearing that there will not be a room full of people that stand up against a project. We proudly tout when Kairos had their public hearing that we had people come out and speak for it, and not a single person spoke against it. We expect that to happen when we look at the SMR meeting that we're going to have in a few weeks for the TVA site. So predictability on both sides is important, but so is flexibility.
Randy, if I could tack on one thing to what you were saying, you're talking about the timelines a little bit. Are we talking 6 months that you expect to see some return on the announcement, or are we talking years?
With the projects, the larger ones that we're dealing with right now, I think you're talking anywhere from 5 or 6 to 7 years, to be honest. I think some of them have contracts in hand. BWXT will be a great example. Those folks are going to move like lightning. They're actually going to be constructing something out there. They're in for a site permit after their announcement next week. They're going to be building something in the next few months. They're going to build their building that will manufacture the centrifuges that will go into the second phase. So you're talking about a long lead time that you do have to manage, and that also, when you talk about your MOU and your agreement, that flexibility's got to be built in for that reason. And I would say, be realistic. That's the one thing as a company, be realistic about what that timeline is. We all understand it's going to be long, but be realistic so that when it goes into an agreement that you can meet those timelines so that, it is not a good thing, and I think Councilman Hope will agree with this, to have to go back to a city council and say, well, we didn't meet this guideline on this agreement, so we're going to have to change it. So build in, accountability, but some flexibility.
I can't remember what the question was.
You can talk about anything you want. No.
Yeah. For, for us, again, the idea of nuclear is, it's intuitive after, I heard it, but I didn't really think about it before getting into the Tribes Department of Energy. But, I liked the idea of wind. I liked the idea of solar, fill in the blank with clean energy. I like hydro. The idea of not emitting pollutants and stuff. And so then nuclear would, fit that as well. All energy production has its costs, whether environmental, monetary, and nuclear is no different. I think that for us looking at it, one of the biggest differences that we have to keep, talking through is that in the future of climate change, we don't really know what exactly that's going to look like. And so when we're talking about anything that's dependent on a weather system or climate factors, there's a potential that it could be really good in some areas and not great in others, where nuclear is more of a, once it starts, we know the output, we know what we're going to get. So that timeline of, 7 to 10 years, we got to get through the testing phase, we got to actually implement some of these, continue to refine the design, and then ultimately bring the cost down in order to make this a reality for communities. And that is a really hard thing for us to be able to put on paper policies that will persist through different administrations and things that will support a longer term vision that's where we would like to go. And I think that the way Randy had said it is really important. If you're talking about developing one of these ideas, it's really important just to be honest about the timeline, rather than trying to make it seem like, it may be sooner than it really will. I think, to me, I would rather hear an overestimate and then, hey, we're ahead of schedule, than an underestimate and we have to keep pushing that back. That being said, one of the very long timeline things that we want to continue to figure out, and I know we're not unique in this, is what do we do with the waste? And for a tribe, that's a point that they are going to bring up every time that we talk about anything to do with any type of industry. How do you manage it long term, trying to value the environment that we're leaving behind for our future generations? So.
Matt?
Randy and White hit on two key words: honesty and predictability. And when I was on town council, I had a mantra when we were making land use decisions, because any of you on town council know that the majority of what you do is land use codes, right? And my mantra was TCP, transparent, consistent, and predictable. If you're able to do those three things in your land use policy, as an industry person, if you follow those three things as your engagement with the community, you're going to be honest, you're going to be predictable, and as Stephanie and Marla at NE83 say, they want to move at the speed of trust. Well, you have to earn that trust. And if you operate with TCP as a mantra, you can earn that trust, and that's your foundation to building a relationship, and that's the beginning of a necessary step to approaching nuclear in a community. Now, Colorado, we all like to think we're unique, right? We've got the rural-urban divide as a real thing. But I was at a dinner last night, and guess what? Utah has a rural-urban divide between Salt Lake and Carbon and Emery County. Washington State has a rural-urban divide from the Seattle area and the Eastern Plains. So we all have this dynamic that we have to navigate. And understanding that dynamic, which I believe most of us in this room understand, is really key. Also understanding that the majority party in the state of Colorado, while Congresswoman DeGette supported the Advance Act, the majority party came out and said, oh, we'll support nuclear once there's a solution for waste. So I'm not very smart. I think that's why Kara put me up here on this table, was to help everyone else elevate their presence. I was dumb enough to look down the rabbit hole, and I said, well, what do you mean there's not a solution to waste? Let's find one. If there's a rabbit, we'll eat dinner. If there's a snake, we'll run away. And, you know, the CSIF is a reality. And then getting the bipartisan support on House Bill 1040 to define nuclear as clean, their number one talking point was repurposing. And so there's the potential to have a dinner down that rabbit hole if we have good conversation and if we understand the political dynamics in this rural-urban divide. And all that comes back to TCP.
Good. I'd love to add, I think Matt makes an excellent point, and I'd just love to add, I hate to say this because it's still a work in progress, but we're looking at a nuclear zoning district that would be specific for a couple reasons. Number one, to allow predictability to the companies that come in so that they don't know, because, you know, our regular industrial zoning districts, IND 1, 2, and 3, really don't define it well enough. So we're looking at it for that reason. And we're also looking at it for the reason that you can solve some of those issues and have some of those conversations so that the public understands what it is. Because we're in a new era where, you know, spent fuel is now being turned into other, you know, resource. So how do you allow that spent fuel to come into your community, but guarantee your community that you won't become a site that just has spent fuel that's not being used for that process? So that's the reasons, those are the two reasons that we're looking at that. And I think it's important, predictability, that it's got to be on both sides so that the public knows what they will get and so that the businesses know, you know, what they have to do to comply to be there.
So all three of y'all have alluded to the fact that your communities are pro-nuclear, are excited about the project. What interaction have y'all had with any that are naysayers or challengers to new nuclear and the nuclear opportunities ahead? And take that a step further, how have you handled it?
I'll just start by saying we don't have that issue in Oak Ridge. We're open for business, right?
For the tribes, we do have, you know, some people in the community that they have very valid concerns, and you know, a lot of them center around the waste stream. Again, that's what, you know, we keep coming back to is when I say that we're pro-nuclear, I think it's important to have an asterisk on that and say the idea of nuclear. You know, so we don't have that direct experience necessarily to say, yeah, we know exactly what this looks like from inception to deployment to management of, you know, all the long-term components of it. So we like the idea of it generally, but, you know, for those people, I think that's where it's our role to be the bridge between the technical side, the economics, the environment, all of these things, and try to get the message back to the people and honestly and openly answer their questions and not try to give anybody the idea that, you know, nuclear is clean no matter how you look at it, or solar is clean no matter how you look at it, but to be open about what those things mean. And I think that leads us to getting away from, you know, just support or opposition, but into meaningful dialogue. So, you know, we do have those things, and I think that's for us going to be a thing where we have to just continue to adapt and try to work through those discussions as they happen.
Robbie, we've had no experience with detractors in Colorado that are anti-nuclear. It's been fantastic, and NPR did not publish a piece on the radio and the newspaper completely editorializing work that hasn't been done and accusing us of turning Northwest Colorado into a nuclear wasteland with high-level waste and green fluid from the Simpsons. So I can't answer this question at all. We've had 80 articles written about the work we've done in the last 2.5 years. Everything from the surveys to the community outreach to engagement and preliminary discussions about a CSIF and spent fuel considerations. Of those 80 articles, one newspaper has written an editorialized piece, and half that piece was from an outside group talking about a deep repository and not a CSIF, and a community on the other side of the state that wasn't Pueblo or Craig or Rangeley or Meeker. So they're going to editorialize whatever story they want to tell, and it's up to us to remain fact-based and to remain data-driven and to do the extra step I do, and that is I don't talk to reporters unless I've interviewed them first. And we've got in Craig a really good reporter who practices journalism. He'll write a story on the facts, leave the editorial out of it, and that's the way we're able to counter it. Facts, data, and truth.
Very good. So let's go ahead and start having a little bit more fun with this panel. Time for audience participation. Seth started this earlier with having all of our communities, economic developers raise your hand who wants to be in nuclear, who wants that piece. I want to get a sense, same group, how many of y'all are dealing with high-level, high-power users either on manufacturing side or more particularly the data center side? All right, raise your hands high or you have to stand up. All right. So with that being said, for you guys, how much of your world is being driven by the lack of power in the community, and is that a driver from getting your states involved in the nuclear conversation?
Yeah, I'm not sure, is that on? You know, we hear this a lot. We're in a scenario with our public utilities where, you know, depending on where you live, you may experience, you know, more blackouts, more rolling outages and things like that. So we hear a lot at our community meetings that, you know, they want a solution to that. They want something that can reliably help get them through those kinds of things. And, you know, just the idea of SMRs is a good fit for something like that. You know, we have 5 districts on the reservation. If we could put an SMR at each one of them, and that could be, you know, a backup system, for example. For us, that's a really good way to open that discussion with the community to start talking about those things as options. And now I feel like I lost the thought there. But we do hear this all the time from our community that they want an answer. And so, again, you know, I think our role is to try to help guide them towards the best thing that we know today and be able to get those things online for them and help take care of those needs of the community. And for us, I think nuclear is a good option. Go ahead, Randy.
We've had to have conversations early on, just to put it in perspective. You know, we're a city of around 34,000. When the Orano project starts up, it will use about 40% of the capacity of the whole city. So we're going to increase our electric by 40%. So that is an early conversation, and that's one that we have with every business that comes in. And, you know, as if you're a utility provider, as we are, we have our own electric system we buy from TVA. You know, that particular project comes with a substation that has a cost of around $15 million. So we've had to come up with partnership to address that. And in essence, the state nuclear fund is going to kick in $5 million on that substation cost. Our partner, Roane County, is going to put in $5 million, and we're going to put in $5 million. So it takes a lot to accommodate that, and that one's larger than a lot of the other ones, but they're all pretty decent-sized power users. So we have tried to build in extra substation capacity. We're trying to be somewhat predictable about where do we think folks will go, and when we can pair them up and create expandable substations, we're certainly doing that. But it's part of the conversation. If you can't power it, you cannot serve it.
Robbie, when you asked that, I looked down at the front row at Mayor Nichols, and he was adamantly nodding his head yes. And now I'm going to get a handful for putting him on the spot. Yes, data centers, they're approaching all of our towns and counties, and they want business, and the concern is how are we going to power them? There's four things, and I say in rural Colorado, but in rural America, that drive all the economies: water, communications, transportation, and energy. And of those four, energy drives commerce, which means it drives the other three, which means we have to answer that question. And if we're talking about data centers coming into our communities, we've got to have the roads, we've got to have the communication, we've got to have the water, but none of that matters if we don't have the energy, which means we have to have these conversations.
If I can add on to that a little bit, we had a day at the Capitol, nuclear day at the Capitol a few weeks ago, and I was asked questions about, what does this do to the grid? And, to be honest, I kind of made something up on the spot. Made sense to me, so I'll pitch it again here. But the truth is, when you, and I mentioned this earlier, the Kairos and TRISO partnerships with Google and Amazon, the answer to freeing up the grid is to have that power that powers these on site. And that is what you see in these partnerships. And if you stop and think about it, that frees up the grid. If those things are pulled off and those power sources are directly on site, it's actually going to be good for all of us. So, we have to be able to converse about those kind of things with people. We've got to be able to tell people the difference between the old nuclear and the new nuclear so that they understand, what is TRISO and how does that fuel? It's not like the rod in the water. How is it different? It looks like a pool ball, We've got to be able to tell people it's different, and it is the only solution to the future. We need every bit of it that we can get. Don't ask me what a separated work unit is or a SWU. I can't really define it. All I know is we need 8 times more than we have now of enriched product to meet the demand for electricity that's growing. We need 8 times as much. We need every kind of company that is doing this to be successful. We need Kairos, TRISO, Nana. We need them all to be successful in order to meet the demand that's out there. So it's the only answer to the problem of the future.
I'm going to expand on that again. Kira said we were just going to go back and forth and it was going to be 2 hours. Maybe she was right. In DC a couple weeks ago, there was a county commissioner approached me and said, Matt, we're already having energy consistency problems. How do we fix that? And the discussion turned into, for those of you that are elected officials, you understand what an enterprise fund is, correct? For those that aren't, an enterprise fund, a local government can't profit off a utility. It has to go into a dedicated fund and basically pay for itself. That's the Solomonized, dumbed-down version. But they were talking about setting up an energy fund, an enterprise fund for electricity as a utility in their county. And they said, how do we do that? Well, we've got the options here, whether it's an SMR or a micro reactor, or partner with a data center and let them pay for all the infrastructure that they need to support and help that county survive. Because remember, without energy, you got nothing else.
So I was reading an article earlier this week, and the global add that we're talking about on nuclear between now and I think 2035 is roughly 99 gigawatts. All right, let's think about how little amount of nuclear power that really is. So I have in our community 4 counties that between the 4 of them, their data center project load would take up about 5 gigawatts. How many of you have at least one project that's a half a gig or a gigawatt worth of power looking at it, be it EV, be it battery production, or data centers in general? That's a lot of power demand, and no matter how we look at it, this conversation is critical. So I want to say thank you all for being here and being a part of the solution. Now I'm going to challenge you. What questions do you have for us? What do y'all want to know? What information stands out that you haven't heard from this group that you'd really like some guidance on? I will call on people by name. Yes, ma'am.
My question is for Wyatt. Wyatt, how do you see the issues of like tribal sovereignty and also maybe working with some of the other tribes on nuclear power issues?
I think sovereignty is a very complex thing to navigate. It's the ability for us to be able to have self-determination, self-governance, and be able to make our own laws, policies, while working within kind of a crazy framework of, state, federal, county, city, all of these different jurisdictions that we have to think about. We also have to think about other tribes, and I've already had some conversations with other tribes where when I say that, the Shoshone-Bannock tribes idealized in a again, that conceptual space, we support the idea of nuclear, have, flat out said, I can't believe that a tribe would support the idea of nuclear. That's just a difference in, the history and where we're at today and where people plan to go in the future. So in some ways, we're fortunate that we don't have that history of mistrust necessarily related directly to nuclear, because that's what I've seen a lot of times, and it's really hard to get that back. We don't want to damage our relationships with tribes. We don't want to have negative relationships with, any of our surrounding communities, whoever those are. So we do try to be thoughtful of other tribes. We attend various working groups and things where we get together with a lot of tribes and we try to talk through these things. The same thing that I've been saying about our tribal community remains true with other tribes as well. We need to, keep talking. We need to keep the dialogue going and try to find a way to navigate all of this. So I don't know that that's a very clear answer, but it's the approach that we've tried to take. So. I just want to add on that last question. I realize that you asked about, AI data centers, that kind of thing, and that's where my brain went to mush. So I don't know about any of you, but I get a little bit nervous in front of a room full of people I think are much more well qualified than I am. So for us, we are very much interested in the idea of developing a data center. We can see sort of the writing on the wall. Idaho's a sparsely populated state. It's very likely that at some point there's going to be a data center developed in Idaho. So for the tribes, again, we want to get ahead of that. We want to start answering those questions now. And that's something that we're trying to work on with industry partners and the feds and other agencies as well. So.
Next question.
Matt, I'm curious how you have corrected the narrative that may have been spun incorrectly related to the media coverage. You referenced 80 articles and some quote-unquote fake news that may have been shared. How have you corrected that?
I've worked really hard with the editors of those articles. I think I was on the phone for 2 hours with the production manager for NPR in Boulder, where he told me he cared about writing accurate news about the Western Slope, and I laughed at him. But in that 2 hours, we went through line by line on that article, and he issued immediately 4 retractions to the article. Another newspaper reprinted it, because that's the game. One newspaper will write an article, another newspaper will use that as its source material to say that they're telling facts. And I chased these news directors down and had retractions and edits made to those articles. Since then, and in every other article since, my definition of mindfulness, most people think mindfulness, they think doing yoga, being grateful, and smelling the flowers. My definition of mindfulness is having a precision to your thought, word, and action. And I try to be mindful when I speak to reporters and to the newspapers. And I also, there's a little known fact, I'm sure many of you know, if you say you want to go off record, they got to repeat it back to you that you're off record. And I hold them to the fire to that so that we can have the background discussion and set the stage on, if we're having these conversations, this is the context. For example, the conversations on spent fuel are preliminary. It's learning what questions need to be asked. It's learning, is there even interest in community engagement? And there is no project in mind at this time. And then when we go on the record, they have the context, and I'm selective in the reporters I speak to. You have to, just like industry, you study the communities you're going to, and communities, you do your recon on what company's coming to you to do business. You have to do the same with the media. What reporter am I talking to? Do they even have a history in writing about energy? And what is the purpose of the article that they're writing? So I've worked really hard in that regard to stay true to fact-based, data-driven, and here is the context. Does that answer your question?
And another question on the next row.
Thank you. This is another question for Wyatt Peterson. So you talked about how, some of your community members face blackouts and outages, and that's part of the motivation for looking at new energy solutions. And I was wondering if you have any context to share. I understand that, Native people across America were left out of the Rural Electrification Act, and I'm wondering if this might be like a long-term effect of that.
Is anybody from Idaho Power here? I can't, pinpoint it to any singular thing to say that's the problem, but, we do likely see maybe, let me preface this with, I think that rural communities in general, whether you're talking about tribal communities or not, see sort of the same thing, and that's we all pay our power bill every month, but, the priority for maintenance and upkeep and stuff maybe isn't in those areas. We have areas on the reservation where, it might take you 45 minutes to drive there, and there's, 20 people that live down that entire route. So, and we have to have utility infrastructure going all the way out there. And so I think that what we're seeing is just a lower priority. From a business standpoint, it makes all the sense in the world to me. From a community standpoint, it's really hard to answer those questions and look people in the eye and be able to, feel good about what we're telling them. And then basically, it's not up to us is where we're at with it. And that's part of what we would like to see start changing, if we can buy into those systems, if we can do something like that, but I think that it is just a long history of various issues that have compounded, and that's just one of the symptoms of that. So.
This question's for Randy. This is Mayor Brian Paducah. Paducah's kind of a quasi-sister site along with Portsmouth, and Oak Ridge is a number of years ahead, from where you are in the cleanup. And so I'm kind of curious as to, whether or not along the way you really made any mistakes that you wish you would have done differently. I mean, you've mentioned a couple, but we're working hard to get up on the curve and got a lot of great things going on, but curious about that. And my second question is for anybody, and I just was mentioned this to our senator, but everybody here has said, well, there's a data center talking to the community. I mean, they're talking to us, they're talking to everybody. Has there any projection of how many data centers? I mean, it's kind of crazy. I mean, I just can't believe, that there's not some kind of data out there that, that would project even if it was a real swag. Thank you.
I would say the first part of the conversation is you hit the nail on the head. I think we have benefited from a we would not be having this conversation had it not been for DOE, EM being very successful in our community. I'll just say that. We would not have the sites that we have, and we would not be having the conversations that we're having with companies. So credit really goes to them for having us in the game, quite frankly. Without that product to sell, it's very hard to be in the business. I will say, you know, from a mistake standpoint, we learned really quickly to, I'm a city manager. I do some of the economic development. I'm not the primary. We've got a new group that's been formed. But it takes a lot of research to really pick the companies that you want to invest in. And I will say that our state does a fantastic job of doing that research so that we don't have to and we won't make those mistakes. They do depend somewhat on the lab. There will be conversations that go on between the state and the lab about this particular technology, that particular technology. So in my opinion, that's one of the ways that we've avoided some mistakes. And, the other one is, mistakes in, I mentioned, getting to your agreement too quickly as opposed to an MOU and flexibility. And also, the really clear deliverables are an issue that we've made a mistake on one. And, when the lawyers come in the room and the lawyers say, well, we've invested this much, you didn't say it couldn't be in research, there's really not anything you can do about it now. At the end of the day, that company's going to invest that much on site and it's going to be fine. But, just to really cover those bases very thoughtfully and carefully, I think has been a key because we have learned from those mistakes.
Robbie,
Yes.
you're the certified economic developer up here on this panel.
Recovering economic development. But yes,
And in that test that you took with a 50% pass rate, or fail rate, depending on how you look at it, there's a definition of economic development that includes jobs and policy and setting the stage. And to avoid any of you failing that test, I'm going to give you the Solomonized version. Economic development comes down to two things: workforce and tax base. So when we talk about data centers and what's the projected number, I want to give you another statistic. Anybody have one of these in their pocket? This is a cell phone, not a battery pack. This cell phone uses as much energy as a refrigerator. Not just turning it on and off, but what powers this cell phone? You've got, I'm on an Apple. For those of you that are anti-Apple, I apologize. But, I go in and I go to Siri and I ask a question. It has to go query that from somewhere. I check my email. It uses power here and there to do that. Some of you have two cell phones, and some of you from certain states, your IT department makes all of you have the same 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 password. That's unfortunate for you, but you're carrying 2 refrigerators of power in your pocket every day. So if we're talking about predicting the number of data centers that are going to come to each community and what that number is, I don't see how we can predict it when we've got 1 and 2 cell phones in our pocket every day. We've got tablets right in front of us. We've got laptops. We're using more and more energy every day, which means we're going to need more and more of these centers. We're going to need to transition from lithium-ion batteries to vanadium batteries. We've got to figure out how rare earth minerals tie into the equation with nuclear energy. And by pulling all of this together, we might not get the exact number of data centers talking to our communities, but we're going to get a much better look at the economic development potential and possibilities for our communities. So you're sitting next to a senator. I answered it very senator-like, but I hope that I at least gave you a taste of where that could go.
I appreciate that, Matt. We are past our time. I promised Seth we would get back on schedule. I have failed by 2 minutes, but I want to take a moment, thank the panel, thank you guys for being on here. Y'all have done a great job. I appreciate the audience questions as well. I know Chuck has made it very clear that Oak Ridge is open for business. I think every community here We're here because we all are open for business. From Savannah Riverside and the Aiken-Augusta region, state of South Carolina, we're open for business, and I feel like we all can say the same thing. Please come talk to us. If you represent industry that has projects that looking at locations and trying to figure out how and when to talk to a community, raise your hand for a second. There's more than one of you in here. Y'all are about to be on a panel. I say that for the communities that are here, go talk to these guys. They are amenable, they're open, they want to have direct conversations. Take time to have those conversations. That's why we're here, and thank y'all for being a part of the panel today.
Randy, thank you.
Thanks, Robbie.
Really good job.
Super. I'm going to invite our innovators and developers up to the stage now.